Hi, my name is Sonali Basak. I am the Chief Investment Strategist at iCapital, and you're watching Beyond 6040. I'm joined today by Monti Saroya. He is the co-CEO of VistaOne, and he's a Senior Managing Director at Vista, and very steeped in the world of software and artificial intelligence. Monti, what a time to talk to you, because not only have you worked at Vista, which is one of the preeminent firms in the private markets focusing on cutting-edge technology, but you were actually a software engineer yourself. So you have a very unique view of this moment when you think about the next generation of software. How do you think that people need to really understand what's coming next when it comes to Agentic AI and how it's different than the previous generations of software?
I think you have to understand the past to understand where we're heading in the future, right? So when I started my career at Vista in the early 2000s, we were doing installed software. It was called on-premise, right? So we would actually build a piece of software, ship it on a DVD, go and install it at customer sites. And back then, software costs like 2 times revenue. And everyone was like, oh, software's boring. It automates these accounting stuff, and that's what we do. And we built a bunch of best practices and started running those companies better. And that was fun. And then this evolution came along called SaaS, and then eventually cloud. And there was this huge disruption moment in software. And if you go back to that time, it was the same articles that were written then that are being written now. It's like, oh, software's ending, software's dead. There's no terminal value. What do we do? And there was all this commotion. And what ended up happening is we just converted those installed software companies into cloud companies. And coming out of the other end of it, software terminal values tripled or quadrupled, right? So we went from 2 times revenue to 5 or 6, and eventually 7 or 8. And the go-go days of 2021, 15 to 20, which was a little bit insane.
Those were the go-go days.
Those were nuts. Those were nuts.
Well, the funny thing about the go-go days is before you joined Vista, you were a software engineer at Cisco.
I was.
In the late 90s.
I was.
So this is no new rodeo for you.
No, it's not. Look, I think the thing that people have to remember is that these transitions happen in software every 10, 15 years, right? So we forget about the last transition, get used to where we are, and then another transition happens. In the late 90s, I was at Cisco and we were building out the internet, right? We were the NVIDIA of our day, for better or worse. I joined the firm, we were like 10, 15 billion of market cap. I was a young engineer sitting in a dark room writing network code. And a couple years later, we were 100 billion and then 500 billion, and all of that was happening in rapid succession. It looks a lot like the way today looks, right? So we were building out what was the traditional internet, right? Hardware went first. And then all these cloud guys came online, and there were the infrastructure, and then all these software companies that we know as Google and Facebook and all these other businesses, which are actually just underlying software consumer tech, right? And the same thing is now happening, right? We're building out the AI ecosystem. NVIDIA is obviously skyrocketed during this time, but now the cloud vendors are coming online, and neo clouds are being built. But soon after that, it'll be the time for enterprise software to come in and becoming agentic and AI, and it'll be the large winner out of this opportunity.
You know, it's interesting because when you look at the most recent nervousness around software, and we've recovered some of that, right? When we're off the lows in public markets. But is any of the fear warranted? You were talking about the go-go days of 2021. Clearly that vintage was something that is really something the market is still grappling with. Is there kind of a flush out to be seen in that kind of vintage, and is it an all clear from there? Is that kind of the easiest way to think about it?
I think the way to think about it is there's a business transition happening, and the thing that people have lost was SaaS was great because it was recurring revenue and it was predictable, but it was tied to users, right? And people didn't realize that our entire business models were tied to the number of workers and users in the industry, and that's a capped number of users. So if you thought about our revenue opportunity, we did ended up having some nice acceleration, but it got capped at the number of people, right? In the new world that we're entering, where there's agents that are doing all this work and it's usage-based, we've now uncapped the opportunity for software. So I think if you can make that transition from where you are in traditional SaaS into agentic, the actual opportunity set is huge. Now, will all of the companies make it? Of course not. There is a transition that needs to be made, but a lot will. And I think on the other end of it, the terminal value opportunity is huge.
Right. You almost feel like people have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They haven't seen that upside that you're talking about.
100%. And look, I think the things that people forget is a lot of our society is based on rules and regulations and laws that are codified in this thing called software, right? It's not like people are walking around and understanding the regulatory environment of insurance. That regulatory environment is effectively described in software systems, right? And so when you get an insurance policy, when you go to the doctor, how do you all these rules and regulations that are codified are in software. And so the key is, how do you then take that and make it agentic and easier to use? That's the unlock of where we're heading. But you can't say all of these things are going to go away. Software is not going away. It's too mission critical. The question is, how do you increase terminal value? How do you get growth back? And you get growth back by not being so stuck on usage.
Okay, so it's interesting. There's growth, but there's also dollars being put into the ground, and there's
Totally.
some amazing statistics and growth and venture AI native companies.
Yep.
The premiums that are being captured in earlier stages relative to later stages. It's the difference between a 40% premium and a 240%
100%.
premium. So how do you think about multiples for incumbent software companies in this environment? And is it possible to identify a legacy software company such that it can capture similar AI premiums?
Totally, right? So this is the same question we had to answer when we went from on-premise to SaaS. And so back then what we did was we called it our SaaS conversion factory. And so what we did is we took on-premise companies, put them through these sets of rules and processes, and we partnered with Amazon at the time because they were the large cloud vendor, and we made them SaaS companies. And coming out of it, we took these businesses we bought for 2-3 times revenue and started selling them for 6, 7, 8 times revenue. So it's totally possible if you do the actual conversion. So what we did this time, because we're not creative, is we created an agentic factory. So we're taking SaaS companies that are traditional SaaS companies, we're converting them to AI agentic companies. It's early days. We released our first product 6 months ago. Within our portfolio, we already have 400 million of AI native revenue within our existing portfolio, right?
Okay, so tell us more about that, because you also are the head of AI at Vista.
I am.
And so the Agentic Factory, what does it exactly do? You started talking about the progress. What does it mean in real terms?
Yeah, so what it means in real terms is you're a SaaS company that has the software and you're like, okay, well, I want to become AI native. What do I do, right? Where do I start? What are the systems that I build? How do I go about it? So we have an AI labs team at Vista that basically helps you describe what your product should look like, what it could look like in the future. We write up those requirements documents and then we work with our partners. And our partners are Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, OpenAI, all the companies that you would expect us to be
the big
partners.
guys.
The big ones, right? And we have dedicated engineers at those places. So we have over 100 software engineers from Google, over 100 software engineers from Microsoft, Anthropic, OpenAI, and they come and help us build these solutions inside of our portfolio companies. So if you look at our 92 portfolio companies, we're launching a new AI product every few weeks that's helped designed and built by the factory.
I think something that's been missed in all of the AI narratives is how quickly it's allowing for either new business formation or new product
100%.
formation. What are you seeing?
Look, I think that the thing that everyone talks about is cogen, right? So automatic AI cogen. And that's the thing that everyone talks about with Anthropic because they have a really nice model that does it, but all of the players do it. Google does it, OpenAI does it, and they all do it really well, right? When we started going down that path 2 years ago, we got 5-10% productivity out of AI. And we're like, this is good, but doesn't change the game. The models and the products have gotten so well that we can do 80-90% productivity. Now, that's huge in the sense of we can build almost anything. But the hard part is, what are you building? Is it fitting the rules that you need? Is it 100% accurate? Is the context, trust, and scale there to make it enterprise grade? The difference between a consumer app and an enterprise app is the consumer app could be kind of right. So if you and I put our chatbots in and we're like, hey, we want to have noodles. We might go to an Italian restaurant, we might go to a Chinese restaurant, you don't know, right? It's probabilistic. In enterprise, if you ask it for an insurance quote, it has to be accurate 100% of the time because it's regulated, it's deterministic, right? So I think building in that fashion is what's going to drive success for us going forward. And it's harder than people think.
It is. As somebody who, had my kind of lame experience building an app this weekend, I got so far, but it wouldn't be enterprise level ready. What kind of enterprises do you think are going to benefit most from a lot of this agentic AI? What are the processes? What are the industries? Just give us a taste of how the world might change a little bit.
Look, I think the content generation piece of it, you're already seeing it change, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about entertainment, but the truth is you can create really good content with AI almost out of the box, right? So the things that we spent an enormous amount of time, even as knowledge workers, building PowerPoints and PDFs and all those things, all of that is going to get agentified and is already going down that path. So you have co-work and all these other cool tools that you can use.
As a strategist, I love this, by the way.
Amazing.
Just take some work right off.
So what it does is it takes you and takes your brain and can map it into something that's usable without having a bunch of friction in between. So I feel like it goes from idea or thought process to product very, very quickly, which is amazing. The area where it's going to add the most benefit, though, is in these regulated industries, right? The truth is insurance companies, medical companies, pharmaceutical companies, massively dependent on human labor, right? Whether it's pricing, whether it's regulatory work, whether it's figuring out what you're trying to build, the research and development, all of that stuff sits in humans today.
Creates a lot of room for error
in
these manual processes.
It does. The interesting thing is there's errors in human processes today, but we have zero tolerance for AI to have any errors, right? And so the bridge that we are building is, look, there's a human system that needs to be regulated and seen by humans. And so we're building these hybrid solutions where it's like the AI does a bunch of work based on traceable stuff that's already in our existing systems. You can audit it, you can figure out how the decisions are made, and then the agent builds it. It's mostly right, like 90% right, but there still needs to be a human in the loop to check on these super mission critical things that nothing is breaking.
Yeah, that's the part that's a relief,
that's
right?
That's the part that's a key, right? So I don't think, like, I'm not as far out there as the others. I don't think the labor displacement opportunity is going to happen very near term. I think it's generational, right?
Yeah.
And I hear it when I talk to my kids. They're like, I didn't have a cell phone growing up, which my 13-year-old thinks I'm a dinosaur, right? He's like, I can't believe you didn't have a cell phone. Now he's growing up with AI.
Well, I tell
generational.
people that it's kind of like if you lived through the 90s and didn't use AOL, it's just the technology of the era. Why wouldn't you adopt it?
Totally.
And so, but there seems to be, you're right, when it comes to AI, a greater fear around it than prior technologies.
I think it's there's fear around it because it feels more powerful than what it's easier to access because we have mobile and internet now, which we didn't have in the past. But the truth is, it's just another technology that we're going to get used to, right? Distillation of that technology into society is going to happen in waves, right? So that's the big thing. The edge models, if you talk to Dario or someone who I spend a bunch of time with, they're not worried about the technology. They're worried about how is it actually going to be consumed by the larger society and how are we going to build on it? How are we going to safeguard it? How is it going to be helpful versus harmful? And I think that the thing that we're very sensitive to is AI allows you to create a lot, but creating a lot is not always great, right? There's a lot of AI slop that gets created, right? Even within enterprises. And so the key is, what are you building? Why are you building it? Is it making it better? And that's stuff that we track and is a very intensive kind of workflow for enterprise.
So back to the markets for a second here, because public market valuations seem to indicate that there's some skepticism that the rapid transformation that is talked about is possible for large cap public software companies. But is this an area where privately held software companies have more of an advantage for that reason?
So I think that anytime there's a disruption or a change where you're going from one model to the next, and there's a big pricing model change here, right? So you're going from subscription-based, user-based software to consumption-based, there's some uncertainty around pricing. And that uncertainty can be borne by the private markets in private over 1 or 2 quarters. And we can just move much, much faster. We don't have quarterly reporting. We don't have to go and tell our investors that, hey, we shifted from subscription all the way to consumption. There might be a couple of quarters of disruption. We can just do it, and we have done it, right? So in the private markets, you're seeing companies move much, much faster to adopt and change versus in the public markets.
And probably a lot less reliance on legacy systems.
100%.
So then what does this mean? I've got to say, I love a good deal, right?
Yeah.
So does it mean that given the sell-offs that we've seen in public markets with software, does that mean Vista is starting to see opportunities for take privates?
Totally, right? So I think we took advantage of it in 2022 when there was a sell-off after 21. And then the market kind of settled in, and now we've had a little bit more of a sell-off. And it's interesting, it's a broad-based sell-off on everything software. So if your name has anything to do with software, it's oversold, right? Some of the companies probably rightfully sold, a lot of them not, right? And there's some of this stuff that's really, really mission critical. So what we're looking at is, are the boards going to capitulate now? What I tell you is, anytime there's a disruption like this, it takes a couple of months for people to get used to the new normal. And you've seen software kind of recover a little bit. So we're starting to get it to a point where it traded off too far. Now it's traded back up somewhere where it's not where it was before, but it's got a new normal. And now I think it'll open up opportunities for us to do
It's fascinating. And it's probably boards will get comfortable with that valuation that they might capture because it's not the absolute bottom.
Well, I think the big thing for the boards and things that we talk to them about is staying public is not going to help you transform to an agentic company. There's valuation in the near term, but there's long-term valuation that you're worried about. And so if you talk to the vast majority of these software companies are still run by their founders. And so the pitch to the founders is, hey, listen, there's a transformational thing happening. You need help to get through the transformation. You need access to the large folks. And you need access to AI compute and inference, which isn't possible to everyone. It's only possible for the largest companies. And we have that access, right? So we're like, hey, let us bring in our engineering group, our labs group, our hardware, our inference. Let us transform your business so you're much bigger and better on the other end.
So what does this mean for the winners and losers? If you had to advise somebody who's looking at the software space and trying to understand, okay, well, what are the qualities of the companies that might not make it? And the qualities, or the companies that are on the edge, right? The companies that could use that transformation. How do you, very simply in plain English?
Really simply, it's like, do you have control and sovereignty of the data in your system? Like, does that data live only in your system or does it live broadly on the internet? So if you look at content broadly lives on the internet because that's how it gets distributed for the most part. That stuff is more at risk. the stuff that's sitting in systems behind a firewall at customer sites, the regulated stuff, the stuff that's legally required to live there, that stuff is hard to get. That's much better area to be hunting for deals in. And I'd say overall is this EO execution and their access to capabilities there, right? Do they have access to the large cloud players? Do they have access to large AI players? Do they have the right kind of execution? Have they been executing? Can they execute going forward? That's key. Now, that sounds like the hallmarks of any good business is, do you have a good CEO and can you execute? It's exceptionally important in non-steady markets. In markets where there's a full technology shift happening, execution from the team is much more important.
Well, also in the last couple of years before this moment, there was, to your point, a huge push for SaaS, a huge push for cloud. And so
Totally.
there were probably a lot of companies that were able to get away with a little bit of a lax demeanor to going about business.
Look, steady markets, steady times require steady management. In times where there's turbulence or change, it requires active management, right? And so for us, we're very hands-on, and our CEOs and founders are very hands-on, working with the founders of these AI labs to get to the next spot. Now, the good news is, and the thing I think is also lost in the narratives, everyone is rooting for software companies to win. So if you go talk to Dario or Anthropic or OpenAI, they all want these software companies to come to the other end and use them as the infrastructure for the future. Just like I wanted it in Cisco days, I wanted the internet to flourish because we were the infrastructure. This new AI infrastructure requires people to be customers, right? And we're the customers for these.
So when you think about the relationship between AI and software, how do you best describe that?
I think of AI as a infrastructural layer for software to build on top of, right? So the way we think about it is there's 4 or 5 layers that are there. There's a core hardware compute layer, and then there's AI models that sit kind of lower, closer to the bottom, and then you start to build software on top of it. The thing that people forget is software companies are not just code, it's servicing an end customer and trying to get to outcomes. And so building that entire business is what software is predicated on. And so you use the models as infrastructure to go build on top of to build those
I feel
companies.
like AI is software.
100%.
And
AI
people are
underneath it
forgetting that
it's
part of this.
Yeah, look, the funny thing that I was laughing at with the Anthropic folks was a couple months, was 4 or 5 weeks ago, the disruption in the market was when they released Cowork.
Yeah.
And Cowork is a subscription tool for knowledge workers to do knowledge work better. Right? And so it's a little bit like we're losing the plot, right? That's a software company releasing a software product for knowledge workers to do work, right? It wasn't trying to replace the knowledge worker. And so I think part of what we're trying to figure out is, as we move forward, is where are you sitting on the curve of those transformations and are you moving forward?
So back to, we were talking about the potential opportunity for take privates, and whether it's in the public markets, which is a very exciting prospect right now, or in the private markets, what's top of mind for you for new investments? What's on your shopping list, right? What are the qualities of the companies that you would want to really be a part of now?
Yeah, look, I think it was a little bit of what you and I were talking about before we sat down. We look in the boring areas, right? Like what are you guys servicing? What part of the economy are you exposed to? And we think of things like the insurance, healthcare, all those types of areas that are very mission critical, very sticky, that have good cores. We're trying to buy those cores and then build AI on top of it. We think that's where the valuation is. And look, the software company of the future is going to be one that implements AI at its end customers. Like we'll be able to go in, and we are going in with our companies and building AI native for banks, for insurance companies, for retail, for all these places that don't know how to do it themselves, right? And so that's the future, we think, and the ability for software to become services, right? We're going to consume all of that services budget and build agents to do it.
So my last question for you is, given so many questions around AI percolating, what do you think the biggest misunderstanding is about AI?
Look, I think there's 2 camps that I find a little bit confusing. One is the doomerism around like AI is going to take over for humans. And like, it's a software system built by humans, controlled by humans. We can turn it off, right? So I get a little confused with all of the negativity around like, why are we building this? I think there's a lot of legislation now coming out against data centers as an example. I think AI is better for society. It's better for productivity. It's better for GDP. We should be encouraging it, not trying to slow it down. So that's one side of it that I get confused by. And then the other side of it, having lived through the internet bubble and coming out the other end of it, it was great for our society. Like if you think about the best companies that we hail as like the $1 trillion market caps, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, those were built off the backbone of infrastructure that we built during the internet. That'll be the future after we're done building out the AI infrastructure. We're early innings of this. There's going to be a lot more exciting stuff coming out.
So I'm a big reader of a lot of the Vista papers that are coming out. Last question, favorite AI fact?
Favorite AI fact? My favorite AI fact right now is that I think people think of just what is happening in a data center. 90% plus of it is this thing called inference. And so people don't realize that the biggest fact pattern is like, we don't have enough data centers, we don't have enough compute, don't have enough inference. I was telling you I built this home automation system this weekend, which my wife is not the huge fan of. But the thing that I realized is like, it was really expensive. Like it was this agent that was running and checking my lights all the time. And
it was actually not that efficient.
It was not, it was like $250 later. She's like, what are you spending all your money on?
I just spent $30 a month on an app that I built this weekend too. And my husband and I were like, why are we spending this?
We could have gotten it better built. And I think the truth is inference has a long way to go. There's a huge build out of specific stuff being built out for AI. We're going to participate in that. But I think it's going to be really interesting. We have a lot more compute, what you can actually build and the kind of systems you can build.
Monty, thank you so much for joining us here. That is Monti Saroya. He is, of course, at Vista. He's the head of AI there and the co-CEO of VistaOne. And this has been Beyond 6040.